Tip from tactical medicine. Fake shock usually lies before blood does. The first thing I saw was the blood, and the first thing I trusted was my dog. Titan hit the threshold of the medical receiving bay and froze so hard, his nails scraped once on the epoxy before he went completely still. His head stayed low and his neck stretched long, while every muscle in him pulled tight without wasting motion. The fluorescent tubes overhead were stuttering at that thin, bad 60-cycle pulse. It made the white walls look sick and cheap. Under all of it, a man in a torn transit smock was spread on the floor, one hand clamped to his side like he meant to hold himself together by pressure alone. Someone shouted that he was crashing, and someone else yelled for a stretcher. A woman near his shoulder was already saying, "Blood loss, blood loss, blood loss," in that hopeful rhythm people used when they wanted the first explanation to become the right one. Titan didn't look at the man. He was looking past him, toward the service corridor and the gray fire door at the back. That got my attention faster than the shouting did. I went to a knee and did what I always did first. I ignored the wound and checked the room. An exit stood at the rear, one to my left, and a badge-gated door behind stacked coolers. Two men crowded too close for spectators. One wore a logistics lanyard that sat too clean against his throat, bearing no salt marks, no fray, and no sweat polish where the fabric should have broken in by now. Another man had a rough strip along the inside of the trigger finger, his shoulder hanging loose the way shoulders do when somebody has spent too much time carrying weight from one side. Then I touched the patient. I felt warm skin that was far too warm. My fingers found the carotid and felt a pulse moving under the surface with neat, even control. I felt no flutter, no scramble, and absolutely no panic in it. His breathing was worse because it was too measured and too tidy on the release. Under the copper smell of blood, there was nothing I wanted. I found no cold, sour sweat, no sharp animal tang of shock, and no collapse in the flesh. I slid my hand under the dressing and found the packing flat and recent, laid in with enough care to sell distance and not much else. He made the right noise a beat late. I leaned in close enough to smell adhesive, stale coffee, and the bad detergent from the blanket somebody had thrown over his legs for drama. If you're going to die of hemorrhagic shock, at least do us the favor of breaking a cold sweat. His jaw tightened before he could stop it. A small but real reaction around me. The air changed. You can feel it when a room realizes it picked the wrong witness. Titan still hadn't moved. His stare stayed pinned to the back corridor, not the floor show in front of me. I looked where he was looking and saw the lower rack of a rolling cooler cart nosing out from the service branch. I saw sealed medical containers where one barcode strip sat cleaner than the rest, looking too fresh and too square. A digital clock over the receiving desk burned 23:15 in red. The transfer elevator on the far wall cycled every 6 minutes when loading ran on schedule. That meant 23:21 mattered, whether anybody in the room wanted it to or not. "Do not move him," I said, keeping my voice low enough to make people lean toward it. "Do not open that corridor." Nobody liked that, which was useful. A woman in scrubs half stood as if outrage alone might outrank me. One of the clean lanyard men shifted his weight toward the coolers, then caught himself. Good. I wanted him uncomfortable, because bad things leaked at the joints first. Behind me, a wall phone sounded once, before cutting out. It was an internal reroute, and it happened too fast to be casual. By the time I stood up, I already knew how this was supposed to go. I expected a fake bleed in the open and noise in the bay, pulling eyes forward while something sealed and billable moved through the back on a lawful schedule. If I obeyed the version of events everybody else was being handed, the shipment walked. If I pushed, before I could prove it, my license did. Shoes were coming down the hall now, belonging to more than 2 people who moved quickly and then carefully. It was the kind of approach systems used when they had already decided the problem was not the man on the floor, the problem was me. By 23:22, the room had done what rooms like that always did. It picked a story that made everybody else feel normal again and pinned it to me. The pressure doors sighed open behind us, and the receiving hallway filled with that pale institutional light that flattened skin and softened edges. It was the kind of light that made panic look procedural, provided you gave it a clipboard. 3 logistics workers had backed up in a neat little arc and raised their phones to chest height, elbows tucked in, lenses steady. Their posture was not dramatic, but something worse than dramatic, a perfectly controlled formation. They weren't filming the man on the floor. They were filming me. Titan moved tight to my leg without touching it, silent, his body still angled toward the service branch behind the desk. Somebody muttered cold. Somebody else said unstable under his breath, as if lowering the volume made it more adult. Down at the clerk station, keys tapped rapidly in short and hard bursts, the sound cheap and busy and final. It meant an incident report, a timestamp, and a narrative forming all at once. That was the part people never understood. Systems did not need truth first. They needed shape. Give them shape quickly enough, and they would call it order. Declan Creed came through the corridor with a tablet in one hand and fatigue written into the fold beside his mouth. He had that end-of-shift stoop of a man who had been useful too many hours in a row and could no longer afford ideals that cost overtime. "I need your acknowledgement," he said. He said it without anger. At least, not yet. Just pushing the document forward like it had weight of its own. Preliminary triage, stabilization refusal, chain of transfer. He turned the screen so I could sign. I didn't look at the form. I looked at his hands. I saw tape cut across his thumb and an ink shadow on the side of his middle finger. I noted no gun callus and no shoulder set for violence. Just a real worker experiencing real fear. The problem with real workers was that they still helped bad systems run on time. Behind him, one of the phone people shifted his grip and exposed that same squared-off thumbnail I had clocked in the bay. Another had a pale groove on the trigger finger and tried to hide it by raising the phone higher. I'm not signing off on a trauma shock with a core temp of 98.6 Creed. I kept my voice level with no bite in it. Bite would have helped him. Level made him step closer. His eyes flicked past me toward the bay, then toward the side corridor. Titan refused to stop tracking. "You can challenge the file later," he said. "Right now, Internal Affairs wants you to stand down and preserve the lane." There it was, early, clean, and already dressed as policy. Stand down and preserve the lane. What he meant was stop touching the version of events that had already been approved somewhere above both our pay grades. One of the women filming let out a little laugh through her nose, the kind people use when they think they are watching a difficult specialist finally get told no. I took the tablet from Creed long enough to read the header. Transit casualty. Authorized medical transfer. Internal hold pending. That last line had been appended fast. Far too fast. I handed it back. "That man is breathing like a metronome and bleeding like theater," I said. "If you want me to fake being stupid for the paperwork, you should have asked sooner." That bought me 3 seconds. In a corridor like that, 3 seconds was room enough to think. Titan's ears tipped forward. The sharp scrape of a cartwheel echoed somewhere beyond the reception desk. Metal kissed metal and stopped, sounding not random but loaded. Creed scrubbed a hand down his face, tired enough to show me what he actually felt for half a second before procedure climbed back over it. He wasn't protecting the patient, and he wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the narrow strip of ordinary life that let him keep his contract, his badge, and whatever sleep he could get between crises. Fair enough. I had done versions of that math myself. "Harper," he said, and first names were always a bad sign in a hallway full of witnesses. "You keep pushing this and I lock you out." Titan shifted one paw forward with still no bark, offering just tension and intent. I let my eyes move past Creed and over the crowd again, reading hands, shoulders, and the way people made space when they expected something heavier than paperwork to come through. Then I saw it through the gap between two raised phones. A yellow-striped service cart nosing out from the half-open branch hall, stacked with sealed coolers, and one hard case riding under a gray tarp. I noticed gate tags already fixed and ready to move. The lane narrowed in my head all at once. If I obeyed the order, I would lose the shipment, but if I refused it, I would lose the rest of my access. I almost laughed. Then do it properly. Creed swallowed, tapped the tablet, and somewhere behind the clerk station, a printer woke with a hot, mechanical whine. Temporary restriction, if he wanted the lie to stay polite. The crowd widened around me by another foot, giving me quarantine by consensus. Good. Wider meant gaps, and gaps meant sightlines. And now I knew exactly where the evidence wanted to go. The clock hit 23:40 as Titan found the room before I did. That was how it worked when we were honest with each other. The medical logistics sorting area sat behind a badge reader, a steel push door, and the kind of institutional confidence that assumed anything with enough labels on it had earned the right to go unquestioned. Creed's temporary restriction had narrowed my lane, not closed it. There was always a way through, if the building still needed bodies to keep it running. I came in off the side service corridor with a borrowed thermal vest over my scrubs, and Titan ghosting at my knee, silent except for the soft scrape of one nail when the floor changed from epoxy to sealed concrete. The air hit first. It was cold, but not clean cold. It was server room cold. I smelled ozone and fan heat, and old cardboard, with the medicinal sweetness of stored plasma laid over it like bad perfume. Racks rose in rows under fluorescent tubes that buzzed just under the threshold of a migraine. Coolers sat nested in metal cages, each one tagged, sealed, indexed, and blessed by a system that loved barcodes more than people. Titan slowed, nostrils working once, twice, then stopped dead beside the third rack on the left, head low, eyes fixed. He was not looking at a person, but on a blank patch of space hanging over the lower shelf, like the air itself had been scrubbed too hard. I let my own pace die with his. No rush now. Rush made noise, and noise made witnesses. I crouched and looked where he was looking. I found 6 sealed blood transport containers made of white polymer with blue tamper strips, all lined up with their barcodes facing out as if someone had staged the shot for an audit photo. 5 had the ordinary small damage of being handled by tired humans, showing smudged corners and finger oil. 1 had none of that. It was too clean and too square. The temperature sticker on the side read -2 Celsius, and the clear sealing film over it had a tiny lifted ripple near the bottom edge, the kind of microfold you got when somebody peeled a seal back with a nail and pressed it down again before the adhesive fully gave up. I touched it with the pad of my thumb. It caught. It was not enough to show from 6 feet away, but plenty from 6 inches. Titan's breathing changed behind me. He took one quiet pull through the nose, then fell to stillness again. The whole zone felt wrong in a way paper could not fix. There was too little dust around that one cooler, and too little smell. Somebody had wiped the shelf space around it clean enough to erase a trail, and left a sterile halo in a room built on traffic. Real storage gathered grime, but this looked curated. I checked the latch, then the printed transfer code, then the condensation line around the base. The cooler had been moved recently. It was not rolled in from long storage, but shifted and staged. There was a faint crescent of moisture where it had sat somewhere colder and then been reset before the metal shelf could catch up. Cute, I murmured, more to myself than Titan. You people always overdo the honest parts. I was reading the secondary barcode when Creed's voice came in over my shoulder, tired and sharp in equal measure. I was hoping you were smarter than this. I didn't turn right away. I let him arrive in the room before I gave him my face. His shoes stopped 3 paces back. Good. He still thought distance made this recoverable. A peeling sticker doesn't prove a damn thing, he said. "Don't threaten this facility's contract, Vance." The words landed hard because he meant them, not as theater and not as menace, but as a bill coming due. I straightened slowly and looked at him. He had his tablet tucked under one arm and both hands visible, which told me he was trying not to spook Titan and trying not to spook himself. His jaw was tight enough to show pulse. His eyes flicked once to the cooler, then away, like looking too long might obligate him. "That seal was lifted and reset," I said. "That shelf was wiped after the rest of the rack was left dirty. And somebody wants this unit moving under a blood transfer code it didn't earn." Creed gave the cooler one fast, unwilling glance, then looked back at me, the way decent men look at fires they can't afford to admit are real. He wasn't stupid, which was the problem. Stupid would have been easier. Stupid gave you room to hate somebody cleanly. Creed was doing contract math, liability math, employment math, and adult math. He took a breath, low and controlled. Even if you're right, you're still outside your lane, locked out of access, and standing in a secured inventory zone with no authorization. You make this formal, you drag the whole node into audit. Supplies freeze. Deliveries stop. People above both of us start asking what else got missed. Titan never took his eyes off that over-scrubbed patch of air. Neither did I. Not really. The cooler had turned the fake emergency into something with edges. It was not just a staged bleed, but a chain and a route. It was a system using medicine as camouflage. Creed saw enough of that to be afraid. He just didn't fear the same thing I did, and that was worse. Somewhere beyond the far cage shelves, a lift motor kicked on and whined into motion. Something else was moving, and now I knew this room was only the first lie with a serial number. By 0005, the building had climbed out of noise and into authority. That was always the colder phase. The administrative control room sat above the receiving lanes behind reinforced glass that looked down on movement without ever having to smell it. Monitors washed the walls in soft blue and sick white. Badge logs, elevator cycles, camera feeds, and shipment status filled the screens. People were reduced to icons, and icons were reduced to compliance. The air conditioner hummed too hard, drying the back of my throat. Titan stood just inside the door, close enough for me to feel the heat off him, but far enough that nobody could call it aggression. Elena Saren was already there, waiting at the end of the narrow conference table with a folder, a tablet, and the posture of someone who had spent her career making bad news sound procedural. She kept a controlled suit, controlled mouth, and controlled hands. She displayed no theatrics and no visible temper. That made her more dangerous than the screamers. Screamers wanted witnesses, but Saren wanted records. She didn't offer me a chair. Fine, I didn't want one. One wall screen held a frozen image from receiving me in profile, Titan at my leg, blood on the floor, a bad, still frame, doing its best to make me look like the disruption instead of the person who had noticed it. Saren touched the screen once, and the footage vanished. It was a small courtesy, or a warning. With people like her, it was usually both. Your rigidity is threatening the legal liability of this entire facility. Stand down. She said it the way some doctors announced a platelet count, flat and exact, not loud enough to count as anger. Creed was off to her left, with his tablet lowered, and the expression of a man who had handed a live round to somebody above his grade and hated hearing it chamber. A lifted seal on a blood unit isn't rigidity, I said. It's evidence. Saren's gaze moved to my gloves, then back to my face. She offered no eye roll and no sneer. She was too disciplined for caricature, which meant every choice she made had already been costed out. Evidence is what survives process. At the moment, what survives process is an unauthorized physician bypassing access restrictions and contaminating a secured chain. There it was. The message was not that I was wrong, but that I was expensive. It was a different accusation, and a more dangerous one. Titan gave a faint huff through his nose, catching the alcohol trace off the room and something hotter underneath it. Stress had a smell. So did fear when it had been trained to sit up straight. I pulled a marker with a black barrel and a cracked clip from my chest pocket before I consciously decided to. Its cap was already loose from too many one-handed pulls. It was a habit, or a compulsion, if you wanted the rude clinical term for it. Saren saw the motion and watched without comment as I uncapped it with my thumb. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the server fans through the wall and the dry electric tick of a vent adjusting its flow. I turned my left hand palm down and drew the first line across the nitrile over my knuckles. It was short and straight. The felt tip dragged with a soft hiss over rubber. Second line, another hiss. Third, I applied darker pressure on that one. Titan's nose twitched at the alcohol in the ink, and he shifted his weight a fraction closer. Not enough for anyone but me to notice. I capped the marker and tucked it away. Saren watched all of it with the careful blankness of somebody filing away a behavioral irregularity for later use. If you continue interfering, I suspend your remaining access, flag your license for review, and attach your name to every downstream delay this causes. The words opened something old in me that I kept nailed shut for a reason. It was not memory exactly, but more like the shape of it. It was the sensation of trusting a clean procedure until the body count proved the paperwork had lied first. I didn't give her that on my face. She had earned resistance, not confession. Creed moved then, just enough to remind both of us he was still in the room. Director, she thinks the transfer code is being used to hide a reroute. It was not advocacy, and not betrayal either. It was just a man trying to reduce blast radius by naming it carefully. Saren took that in, then turned one monitor toward me. A service cart sat paused outside sub-storage, the timestamp rolling in the corner. Gate tag pending. The movement was delayed, not stopped. "This is what your interference buys you," she said. "Congestion, exposure, liability." She believed it, which made her useful and dangerous in equal measure. The system had taught her that order prevented harm. Mine had taught me order could be camouflage. I looked at the paused cart, then at the corridor map glowing on the adjacent screen. One branch led deeper into the storage maze before reconnecting near outbound refrigeration. It was a blind seam in the building, narrow, ugly, and possible. If I stood down, the cart moved as soon as she released the hold. If I pushed, I burned what little cover I had left and went in dirty. Neither option was clean enough to satisfy a committee, which meant it was probably the real one. "Understood," I said. My voice had gone so low it barely carried. Somewhere below us, something heavy started rolling again. Inaction had just become another way to help them. The cart started moving again the second I left Saren's control room. It was not fast, because fast would have looked guilty. This was worse. It was measured, timed to the building's own pulse, rolling down the blind seam in the storage map like it belonged there. Titan stayed at my knee through the service stairwell, quiet except for the tap of a claw on painted concrete when I cut a corner too tight. My access was half burned, and my name was probably crawling through 3 separate reports. The fake casualty upstairs had already done his job. That left me one useful option. I needed to stay close to the freight and wait for the lie to need hands. The sub-storage level was darker than the floors above, showing more utility than medicine. Pallets, caged racks, idle carts, and an electrical hum filled the space. No public face was left down there, just function. Titan slowed before the yellow safety stripe at the loading threshold and gave me that tiny shift in weight I trusted more than most human testimony. Somebody was on the far side of the partition, standing too still for staff and too patient for panic. I rolled an idle defibrillator unit away from the wall and kept walking like I was still just the difficult doctor who hadn't learned when to quit. He stepped out from behind the cart in the same torn transit smock, minus the blood panic and minus the performance. It was amazing what a man could recover from when the injury had been theater. One hand hung loose at his side. The other hovered near his waistband, in that careful, not careful way people used when they were waiting for permission from themselves. His face looked leaner now, more guard than patient. "You're making this hard," he said. The broken edge was gone from his voice. Titan did not bark. He ghosted right, nails ticking once, then stopping as he angled his body toward the rear exit. It was a good lane. The man saw it and recalculated. So did I. Distance, shelving, a metal cart, and a blind camera cone above the duct junction separated us. I held the defibrillator weight in my hand. There was too much open space between us for anything pretty. His eyes flicked to the machine, then back to me, trying to decide whether I was still stupid enough to act like a medic. That was when his shoulders changed. I caught a small drop on the right, his elbow tucking, and a decision landing. I heard fabric rasp over a grip before I saw the gun. I moved before the weapon cleared. It was not movie fast, just first. The defibrillator came up hard and ugly, carrying all borrowed weight and bad intent, and the squared edge of the housing drove into the notch above his collarbone with a jolt that ran straight through my arms. The impact landed heavily, forcing him to stagger. His hand spasmed open before the gun had fully come free. He gasped in sudden pain. I kept the pressure on, pinning his shoulder line so the arm couldn't finish the motion. "Your fake trauma shock was bad, but your draw is even worse." My voice came out almost calm. Titan's feet hit the epoxy in 2 clipped beats as he slid into the back angle and sealed the exit without a growl. Head low, eyes locked, waiting for one word. The man tried to turn into me instead of away, smart enough to know retreat was gone. His free hand caught my sleeve. Then he drove a dirty elbow into my forearm and jerked backwards so hard the machine wrenched across my wrist. Pain flared white. He almost got the muzzle free on the second pull. Almost. We slammed sideways into the cart, making plastic coolers rattle above us. He shoved off the rack and tried to drag me with him. Dead weight and bad leverage. The kind of ugly resistance that hurt worse than a clean punch. The weapon struck the floor and vanished under a lower rack. Pain fired through my right wrist, where the machine jarred against bone. He tried to drive me backward with body weight alone. It was a better move, but too late. I struck his leg to break his balance, driving him downward until his knees hit the concrete and his resistance faded. For about 2 seconds, it was over. That was the first thing wrong with it. He folded faster than a man with that much nerve should have folded. There was no backup through the rear door, no second shooter, no alarm, and no scramble. There was no last swing to buy time for the real asset to clear the building. I saw just one fake patient, one bad draw, and one easy win. I stood there breathing through the ache, burning up my forearm, while Titan held his angle and listened to the corridor behind us. The room settled around the fight in little sounds, fan motors humming and loose plastic ticking back into place. My own pulse came down by stages. I looked at the man under me, then at the blank transport cart, then at the status strip blinking on the pallet scanner bolted to the wall. Pending transfer had cleared from one line and reappeared somewhere else in the queue. That was the second thing wrong. This whole encounter had been thrown at me like a curtain, something to catch me, mark me, and slow me down, but not something they expected to win. I had just stopped being the abrasive doctor with a license problem and become something more expensive. Anybody watching cameras knew it, and anybody upstream with a calm voice knew it too. Titan flicked one ear toward the ventilation passage and stared. He was not looking at the man, but past him, toward where the real movement had gone. By 0035, it came together in motion, which was annoying. I would have preferred a whiteboard, a pot of bad coffee, and maybe 10 uninterrupted minutes to hate what I was seeing in peace. Instead, I had a groaning man pinned on cold concrete, a wrist beginning to throb, and Titan standing with all his weight loaded toward a ventilation passage that hadn't mattered 5 minutes ago. We were in the server corridor, because that was where the building's lies were converging. The air changed first. I smelled no sweet rot of stored blood, and no slap of disinfectant. I just caught hot ozone from the cooling fans and the dry metallic smell of overworked circuitry. The fluorescent tubes overhead pulsed at that same bad 60-cycle flicker that made depth feel unreliable if you stared too long. Titan didn't look back at the man we had dropped with flex cuffs and a split lip. He put his nose toward the narrow seam beside the vent housing and held there, inhaling in short, precise pulls. It was nothing theatrical, just pure elimination. Blood, alcohol, detergent, and human stress. Strip them all away, and what was left was airflow from somewhere it shouldn't have been, moving faster than the corridor map justified. I leaned one shoulder against the caged wall and made myself work the chain from the start instead of admiring the violence. Fake shock, controlled breathing, warm skin, and a packed wound. Internal affairs standing me down before anybody had reason to care. Then the cooler and sorting with the lifted -2 seal and the too clean halo around it. Then this idiot downstairs, placed just far enough inside the restricted lane to catch me if I pushed. It was not a guard post, but a delay package, a human speed bump with a gun and a cover story. My mouth tasted like old pennies. I looked through the mesh toward the cross corridor where insulated conduit lines ran above the ceiling and freight lanes cut beneath them. The whole place had been built to make movement look boring. That was the genius of it. Nobody watched boredom closely. They watched blood on floors, bad behavior, difficult staff, and whatever made enough noise to justify a report. Titan drew back from the vent and turned his head once toward me, then back again. There was no confusion in it, just vector. That mattered. The dog had ignored the casualty twice now and prioritized route over body both times. It was the same pattern, just a different mask. I went back to the cooler photos I had snapped in my head because I didn't have the luxury of a real camera anymore. I recalled the lifted seal, the wrong microfold, and the recently moved condensation ring. Stored blood had been used as a wrapper for something that needed temperature language and medical immunity to travel without questions. It was not a single weird event, but a choreography. The fake patient had dragged eyes forward while the tagged cart rolled deeper into the node. My fight downstairs had done the same thing on a smaller scale. Catch Harper, burn her clock, force the problem into a room with a body on the floor while the real freight kept moving under codes too ordinary to excite anyone. I looked at the overhead sign for infrastructure access, then at the maintenance hatch. Beyond it, with paint rubbed off the handle by years of use. The route didn't have to be legal in the moral sense. It only had to be legal enough in the system sense. A reroute under medical priority. A transfer under refrigeration authority. A blind seam through the server corridor, where cameras cared more about door integrity than payload class. The decoy did its job, I said. The real freight is moving through the server corridor. Saying it out loud didn't make it dramatic. It made it harder to deny. The bad part came right after. Once I had the pattern, my options got smaller, not larger. That was how grown-up trouble worked. I didn't get to kick in every door and call it justice. I had a suspended access trail, a hostile paper record, and one subdued operative who was probably worth less than the shoes on my feet. I had a narrow pretext if anyone stopped me. Contamination review. Chain of custody discrepancy. Missing temperature integrity. Tiny words, but useful words. Titan eased forward as I started down the corridor, his nose low and his ears pricked toward the vent line where the air moved wrong. Server fans clicked and whined beyond the wall. Somewhere deeper in the node, a freight lift took load with a heavy metal thunk that traveled through the floor into my knees. There, real movement. Not the performance, not the argument, and not the tackle on concrete. It was the actual heart of it. I flexed my sore hand once, and felt heat shoot up the wrist. Fine. Earned. The corridor ahead narrowed between ductwork and locked access panels until it stopped looking like hospital infrastructure and started looking like a throat. It was legal enough to walk into and tight enough to die in. That was the lane they had left me. And now that I could see it for what it was, stepping away from it would have been the only truly stupid thing I had done all night. By 0050, I heard the badge reader before I saw the man using it. I caught one low electronic chirp, then the clean green blink of acceptance. Titan and I had followed the bad airflow into Transport Sector 3, where the building stopped pretending it was a medical node and showed its real religion. Movement, clearance, chain of custody. The corridor widened into a transfer bay lined with rolling cages, insulated cases, and floor tracks polished smooth by years of freight nobody remembered after it moved. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead at that thin 60-cycle flicker that made every white surface look tired and every shadow look patient. Titan checked once at my knee, then froze so hard the leash clip whispered against my belt ring. Head low, eyes fixed. He was not looking at the door, but on the man stepping through it, like he had been born with access. He wore slate gray logistics coveralls, so clean they looked issued that minute. Clean boots, no visible weapon, no hurry. The uniform belonged to the bay, but he didn't. He palmed his ID across the scanner in one smooth pass, got his green light, and kept walking. Then I saw the lanyard. Blue woven strap. Company issue, perfect stitch. No sweat polish, no salt crust. I saw no frayed curl at the collar where a real worker dragged the thing through 12-hour shifts. It was the cleanest object in the room, which in a freight bay full of scuffed steel and wet track grease felt almost obscene. He went 3 steps into the bay before he turned, as if the timing mattered and he knew it. Mid-40s maybe. He was lean in the way some men got when they carried stress instead of weight. He possessed a pale face that would disappear in a crowd if he wanted it to, with hair clipped close, hands unremarkable, and shoulders easy. No theatrical scar, no wolf grin. He was just a person who had spent a long time learning how to look like the most boring explanation in the room. Corporate menace had a uniform now, defined by pressed seams, a mild expression, and legal access. His eyes went first to Titan, then to my injured hand, then to my face. It was an inventory, fast, quiet, and complete. That was enough. Silas Shaw. The whole bay bent around him without touching him. 2 cart handlers at the far cage kept working with their heads down, but their pace changed by half a beat when he arrived. 1 freight elevator paused on a locked floor and stayed there. A red status bar blinked amber on the wall console, then cleared. He noticed, I noticed. I shifted half a step to my left to keep the outbound lane and the side service hatch in the same line of sight. Titan remained carved in place, all loaded muscle and silence. The man watched that too. "You're a long way from intake, Doctor," he said. His voice was mild enough to pass for helpful. Mild voices did some of the worst work in this world. "Occupational hazard," I said. "I go where the bad paperwork starts sweating." It wasn't a joke for him, but a measurement. He let the corner of his mouth move. Not quite a smile. "Dr. Vance, protocols are built to protect the people who know how to follow them." There it was. It was not a threat if anybody pulled the audio later. Just policy, with teeth filed to a point. His badge rested flat against his chest when he spoke, and the clip sat too perfectly vertical. There was no habitual twist, and no nick where nervous fingers worried the plastic. Up close, the coveralls were wrong too. They were pressed, but not broken in, showing crease memory without labor memory. Titan's nostrils flared once, then shut down. He offered freeze instead of scenting. Sterile pattern overload. The man saw the dog do it, and something in his gaze sharpened, like a safecracker hearing the right tumbler click. He wasn't intimidated, but interested. That bothered me more than open aggression would have. Behind him, one of the wall panels flashed access route updated, then disappeared before a casual eye could read it. Freight lanes were being redrawn in real time, not for volume, but for containment. I let my eyes travel past his shoulder to the service maps mounted beside the elevator. 2 exits I had counted on 5 minutes ago had just gone from green to gray. The trap closed politely. That was the worst part. There was no alarm, no klaxon, and no men with rifles. There was just the soft clack of magnetic locks taking hold down the corridor and a delayed negative chirp from the side hatch when I tested it with my borrowed badge. Titan shifted one paw forward, then stopped at the yellow line as if the floor itself had turned live. Shaw didn't move to block me because he didn't need to. The system had done it for him. Somewhere above us, freight routing updated again with a dry electronic trill. One rolling cage began gliding toward the outer exit on a motor track that had been idle a second earlier. The whole engine ran on calm. Shaw glanced toward it, not long enough to look eager, then back at me. He already knew I could see the move and couldn't stop it clean. That made us honest with each other at last. I felt the ache in my hand pulse hotter and felt Titan gather himself against the leash without sound. I understood exactly what Shaw was offering. It was not surrender and not escape. It was pressure. Stay in the lane he left me or make noise and lose the freight entirely. I met his eyes and saw the same recognition, looking back. He knew I wasn't just a difficult doctor anymore, and I knew he wasn't just a freight manager with excellent posture. The next door down the line sealed with a dull magnetic thunk. Then another. Titan and I were still inside the corridor when the network finished deciding we were supposed to stay there. By 01:05, the corridor had stopped pretending it was a route and become a holding pen with bad lighting. The outer emergency exit sat at the far end behind reinforced glass, crash bar, keyed override, and a wall-mounted control tablet, already awake and asking for 2-factor authentication from a supervisor who was not going to help me. 45 seconds to load, according to the progress ring crawling across the screen. 45 seconds in a space built for freight, not cover. Titan stood one body length ahead of me, at the corner where the service spur met the exit lane. His head low, chest still, and eyes on the blind angle where the first man would appear if Shaw decided to finish the lesson by proxy. I clicked my tongue once. Lock the corner. Titan moved 6 inches and turned to stone, sealing the angle with his body the way a door seal met a frame. No bark, no drama, just consequence. Behind us, motor tracks hummed as another cage rolled somewhere deeper in the node. In front of us, the tablet asked for a code I didn't have, while the lights above us pulsed like a headache trying to become religion. The first attacker came in fast and flat, wearing a medical smock over body armor, his face shield pushed up, hands empty until they weren't. He led with a baton instead of a gun, which told me Shaw still wanted deniability more than corpses. Good to know, but not useful enough to thank him for. Titan didn't lunge. He held the corner and forced the man wider, just enough that the approach line broke. I stepped in before the baton finished rising, drove my forearm into his chest, and stole his balance. Then, the second man hit me from the right with shoulder and weight, and no wasted motion at all. He possessed better training than the fake patient downstairs. We crashed into a steel staging table, hard enough to rattle the tablet on its mount. Pain flared across my knuckles as they struck the edge, leaving my hand throbbing and slick. I shoved the first man backward into Titan's angle and got half a second to breathe before the second one came again, trying to crowd me off the tablet and into the gap between the table and the wall. That told me the objective cleanly. Don't kill the doctor. Pull her off the lock. Buy the freight time. The progress ring crawled to 12% with machine indifference. I grabbed the baton arm on instinct and hated how natural the motion felt, knowing muscle memory was a rude roommate. The second man twisted, trying to strip free. I turned with him, instead of against him, and dragged his weight into the staging table until metal bit back. My hand throbbed as it scraped the edge, leaving my grip slick and unsteady. I hit him with the edge of the tablet housing still bolted to the wall. It was not elegant and not smart-looking, but just there and heavy and close enough to matter. The heavy plastic connected with his cheek, and he dropped to one knee. The first one tried to recover on Titan's side, but the dog shifted a fraction and filled the gap so completely the man checked himself rather than crash into 30 kilos of disciplined malice. Good choice. Titan snapped no teeth and made no noise, just held his ground so the attacker had to circle wider and lose time. "Come on," I muttered, though I wasn't talking to them. The tablet crawled past 28%. The second man lunged low for my legs. I jammed a knee into his shoulder, felt my torn hand slide on his collar, and paid for it with a bolt of pain up the wrist that made my vision pulse. He landed a short and heavy strike to my ribs, enough to fold the air out of me without taking me down. The ring hit 43 seconds, and the corridor turned ugly in that quiet, committed way ugly things do. The first attacker finally drew a pistol, keeping it low and tight because subtlety had run out. Titan saw the change before I did and shifted one pace, forcing the man to redirect around him instead of through the corner. That gave me the only window I was getting. I went at the gun arm with everything my right side still had and slammed it into the crash bar. I felt the shot bury itself somewhere inside the wall, with a concussion that turned the corridor into a metal throat. My injured hand slipped against the edge of the bar, hot and suddenly useless feeling. I stripped the pistol loose and threw it down the service grate where neither side could grab it fast. The tablet finally chimed, granting access. I hit release with my clean hand and dragged one sealed hard case off the waiting cage, just as the outer lock disengaged with a heavy mechanical clunk. It was not all the freight, just one piece and one proof. Behind me, boots were coming, representing more than 2 sets now, and every camera in the sector had probably learned my face by heart. Titan backed through the opening without breaking eye contact with the corridor. I followed, bleeding, shaking, and very aware that whatever anonymity I had left was gone for good. We had a piece of the shipment, and they had the rest of me on record. At 01:15, the first thing I heard was the tone. It was not an alarm, but worse than that. One deep, almost polite electronic note rolled through the central control station like the building had finally decided to speak in its real voice. The tablet in my clean hand went gray all at once, washing the corridor in a flat ash-colored glow. Internal Audit Override Level 4 burned across the screen. Down in the parking grid beyond the glass, gate arms froze, half raised. Freight elevators stopped between floors with a heavy shudder that came up through my boots. Every access light that had been green a second earlier went hard red. Titan's head snapped toward the sound and then toward the vehicle bay, his ears forward and body taut, despite the fatigue dragging at him. This was Elena Saren, all right. She gave no speech and no warning shot, just a quiet, career-ending kind of interference. A side channel on the wall console opened with a dry click, and her voice came through stripped clean of anything human enough to be called emotion. "Your transit clearance doesn't exist." She wasn't talking to me. Shaw reacted faster than the system did. That told me more about him than any personnel file could have. He was already moving across the control floor by the time the last elevator lock finished cycling. One hand, going inside the gray field jacket he had added somewhere between the freight bay and here. No more logistics clerk. No more procedural ghost. Titan shifted with him, not charging, just changing the geometry so Shaw had to cut wider if he wanted the parking exit. Through the glass wall, I saw 2 transport carts dead, stopped, nose to tail. One of them still carrying the QR-tagged crate family I had been chasing since intake. The other had pinned a night loader between its corner rail and a waist-high bollard when the system slammed everything shut. The man was alive. and I knew that from the way he was trying not to move. Shaw drew a compact pistol and fired once into the ceiling camera above me, showering us with plastic grit. Survival mode now. Clean cover gone. Move, he said. That was the first honest word I had heard out of him all night. The station compressed into choices. I could chase Shaw while the override still had him boxed in. Maybe take the rest of the shipment if I bled fast enough and got lucky. Or I could go through the crash release, get to the pinned loader, hold the hard case I had already ripped free, and let the tail of the network shear off into the dark. Titan looked at the man in the parking bay, then at Shaw, then back at me. It was not confusion, but confirmation. There was no clean answer hidden in the room waiting for me to earn it. Shaw took another step, gun low, trying to draw me into the lane between the console bank and the glass. He wanted me committed to him, not the floor below. Smarter than rage. He fired again, lower this time. The round slapped a panel 2 feet off my shoulder and turned one of the screens into dead static. I dropped behind the console, jammed the sealed hard case against my ribs, and hit the crash bar release with the heel of my clean hand. Somewhere below, the emergency stairwell unlocked with a buzzer. Elena's channel stayed open 1 beat longer than it had to. I heard her inhale once, like a person signing something in blood. Then the line cut. There was your career risk, Director. Quiet, digital, and permanent. I went down the stairs half sideways because my hand wouldn't cooperate if I tried to use the rail properly. Titan was ahead of me, silent except for the slap of his pads on concrete. But he checked back at each landing like he knew exactly how much speed I had lost. When we hit the vehicle bay, the loader was pinned worse than I had hoped and better than I had feared. His leg was definitely not right. The cart had ridden the bollard and trapped him crooked, leaving just enough room for him to keep breathing and not enough for him to free himself. Blood from my hand was tapping onto the polished floor in dark commas. Above us, on the far side of the immobilized freight line, Shaw came through the maintenance gate with the kind of efficiency that meant he had already found the one route Saren's override couldn't lock in time. He saw me kneel by the trapped man. He saw the choice land. Good. Let him. I shoved the hard case under the loader's shoulders to keep it out of the blood wash and took the emergency lever on the cart housing with my good hand. It was too stiff. Titan planted himself between us and Shaw's lane, head low and chest square, buying distance with posture alone. Shaw could have taken the shot. He didn't. Maybe the angle was bad, or maybe he wanted the rest of his freight more than he wanted my corpse. Same difference. I hauled the lever again, and the cart released just enough for the loader to scream this time, which was actually reassuring. He was alive and still mine to save. By the time I got him clear, Shaw was backing through the service gate with one case, not the whole line, and the gate was already trying to close around him. Limited win, ugly as hell. I had a living witness, one proof box, and the clean knowledge that some part of the shipment was leaving with him anyway. At 01:30, the medbreak room felt smaller than a supply locker and less forgiving. Somebody had left one overhead light off, which was kind of them in the way exhausted institutions were kind. By accident, the remaining fluorescent tube gave everything a thin, washed-out color that made blood look brown until it moved. I sat on the vinyl bench with my torn hand braced on a folded towel and a disposable suture kit open beside my untouched coffee from the start of shift. It had gone cold enough to taste metallic. Titan collapsed against my boot with all the careful dignity of something too well trained to dramatize pain. His flanks were pumping harder than he wanted them to. Every so often, a breath snagged on the way out and warmed the cuff of my pants. That bothered me more than my own hand. The injury spanned my palm, severe enough that closing it one-handed felt like an impossible task. The anesthetic gel they stocked for staff injuries took the edge off and left the rest behind. Good enough. Outside the half-closed door, the building kept working through its disaster in muted sounds. Wheels, vents, and distant radios. Nobody came to congratulate me. Nice change of pace. The email hit while I was cinching the second stitch. My terminal on the counter flashed red once, then again, bright enough to turn the room into a warning label. Internal review notice sat across the screen above my name, followed by the usual dead language institutions used when they wanted punishment to sound like weather. Temporary suspension of access pending investigation. Medication authority paused. Incident conduct flagged for audit. The machine thanked me for my cooperation in the same font it used for expired parking validations. I leaned back and let the pull of the suture bite down through my hand until the spark behind my eyes settled. Fair enough. Elena had thrown the override and bought me a window. The building was going to collect on that from both of us. Titan lifted his head at the screen glow, then let it drop again onto my boot. No complaint in him, just fatigue. I reached down with my clean hand and pressed 2 fingers into the fur at the side of his neck, long enough to feel the heat there, alive, spent. Still keyed toward the door even now. On the monitor, the disciplinary language kept scrolling as if it had all the time in the world. Systems always did. They could afford patience. People did the bleeding for them. I wrapped the bandage tighter than comfort required and stood long enough to cross to the narrow window cut into the far wall. The blinds were half open, bent at one corner, giving me a broken slice of Parking Bay 3 and the service road beyond it. Rain had started at some point without earning attention, just a thin mist turning the sodium lights soft around the edges. 2 official ambulances sat cold and dark. 1 maintenance truck idled with nobody visible in it. Then the van came through the outer lane exactly the way bad news preferred to travel. No rush, no headlights punched high, just a white transport van with a medical vendor decal on the side and a QR tag mounted behind the rear wheel arch, featuring the same placement and same size family as the crate stickers from the sorting rack. Not proof for a jury maybe, but more than enough for me. It rolled to the far gate, paused, while the barrier lifted on somebody else's authorization, then eased out toward the road like the night belonged to it. Titan heard the engine before I did and dragged himself half upright, ears twitching once toward the glass. He didn't bark. He just watched it go with the kind of stillness that made absence feel heavier. That was the tale right there. Not mystery and not prophecy. A surviving vector with tires, paperwork, and a schedule. I stayed at the window until the red wash of the gate lights stopped reflecting off the blinds. My hand was throbbing in time with my pulse now, each beat a private little lesson in consequence. Behind me, the terminal chimed again, probably another form, another request, another sterile description of what the night would cost in official language. I didn't turn around. Some things improved with a short delay. Titan lowered himself back down by the bench, slower this time, and let his head settle against my ankle with all his weight finally admitted. I looked at the empty lot, at the rain stippling the concrete where the van had been a second earlier, and heard myself say it before I decided whether I wanted the words, "The cover's blown, but the freight still moves." That was the whole story, if you stripped out vanity and noise. We had a witness who would live. We secured one hard case the network had wanted to keep buried. A director was about to be audited into a shallow grave. A doctor stood with a torn hand and fewer privileges than she had yesterday. And there was a hole in the night where the rest of the shipment had gone. No sermon attached, no neat receipt. Just the ugly adult version of a win. I shut the blinds, picked up the needle driver again, and went back to finishing what the system had left in my hands.